The soft hum of chatter and clinking glasses filled the grand hall, but my attention was elsewhere. My fingers traced the silk of my champagne-colored blouse, feeling the tension that sat just beneath the surface. I had arrived early, as I always did, finding a quiet corner by the window where the late afternoon sun spilled golden across the polished wooden floors. The engagement party was in full swing, yet I couldn't shake the memory of every whispered doubt, every sideways glance, every judgment I'd endured over the years. Then my phone buzzed. A simple message from my brother, Ryan. "Sophie, can you handle a bit of the arrangements? Mom said you offered." I smiled, though my chest tightened. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same family that once questioned every choice I'd made, dismissed my ambitions, and belittled my independence, now expected me to step in generously, unquestioningly. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, listening to the soft laughter and the faint clink of a glass being set down too hard. I let my eyes drift across the room, my parents bustling about, Ryan nervously straightening his tie, my soon-to-be sister-in-law glowing under a halo of happiness. All of them assumed I would comply, that I would bend to their expectations. But they didn't know the truth. Not yet. I remember the night it all changed, like it was yesterday. I was 19, sitting on the edge of my bed in that cramped apartment above my parents' garage, clutching a crumpled letter in my hands. My parents had just dismissed my plan to pursue design full-time, calling it impractical and a waste of potential. Ryan had stood silently beside them, arms crossed, his eyes filled with that familiar mix of pity and superiority. "You don't understand, Sophie," my mother had said, voice sharp with authority. "You need stability. You need a real plan. Not this dream." The lump in my throat grew with every word. My hands shook, gripping the letter so tightly I thought it might tear. That letter, from a mentor I had met at a small local gallery, promised an internship, a real opportunity to prove myself. But the weight of their disapproval threatened to drown out my excitement. I looked at the little silver bracelet my grandmother had given me for my 18th birthday. She had said, "Sophie, the world will tell you who to be, but you have to remember who you are. That little fire inside you, guard it. Feed it. Never let anyone snuff it out." Her words became my anchor that night. I remembered how she had smiled at me, eyes twinkling, like she already knew I would rise. I pressed the bracelet against my chest, and a decision formed, one that scared me more than anything else I had faced. I would leave. I would chase my own path, even if it meant standing alone. I packed a single suitcase with my savings, the letter from my mentor, and a notebook full of sketches that had been dismissed as hobby doodles. I walked out of that garage apartment before dawn, listening to the quiet city breathe around me. The fear gnawed at me, but so did a strange exhilaration. The first taste of freedom, the first step toward building a life on my own terms. Even then, I didn't know exactly where it would lead. But I knew one thing: I would never let their doubts define me again. The city was vast, unforgiving, and exhilarating all at once. I had less than $100 to my name, a suitcase full of dreams, and a notebook of sketches that felt both fragile and infinite. My mentor, a seasoned designer named Clara Jensen, saw something in me that no one else had: potential, determination, and a relentless curiosity. "You have to fight for every inch, Sophie," Clara said on our first day at her studio. "Talent isn't enough. You need grit. And you need to learn how to survive on your own terms." I did. Long nights became routine, my small apartment littered with sketchbooks, half-drunk coffee cups, and late-night takeout wrappers. I watched tutorials online, practiced relentlessly, and absorbed every bit of advice Clara offered. There were moments when doubt crept in, when clients rejected my designs, when I compared myself to those who had been born with connections, when my bank account barely covered rent. But I clung to my grandmother's words and that silver bracelet on my wrist. Slowly, victories arrived. The first client, who paid me more than I expected, felt like a triumph. The first profitable sale sent a rush of adrenaline that made every long night worthwhile. The first time someone told me, "Sophie, your vision is incredible," I felt my confidence surge like sunlight breaking through a storm. Yet, I kept my success a secret. Social media posts were vague, showing smiles and modest travels, never the lavish studio, the commissioned art pieces, or the small fortune growing quietly under my careful management. I knew my family would never understand the years of struggle, the meticulous planning, or the sacrifices it had taken. And frankly, I liked the quiet satisfaction of knowing my triumphs were mine alone. By the time I was 27, I owned a boutique design firm that had caught the eye of several high-profile clients. My work graced magazine covers, and my name, though not yet widely known, carried weight in the design community. I had independence, financial security, and the freedom to make my own rules. All of it, every sleepless night and every whispered doubt from the past, had been leading to this moment, the one I would encounter at my brother's engagement. They assumed I was still struggling, still pliable, still the same Sophie they had once dismissed. They had no idea how far I had come. And as I adjusted the cuff of my blouse and glanced at the shimmer of my bracelet in the sunlight, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was untouchable. The room buzzed with excitement as the engagement party reached its peak. Sophie Walker stood just inside the doorway, surveying the crowd. Her parents were chatting with distant relatives, Ryan nervously pacing near the gift table, and the bride-to-be, Madeline, glowing in a blush-colored gown. They didn't see her yet, the poised, confident woman she had become. Sophie's heels clicked softly on the marble floor as she stepped into the room. Heads turned briefly, then returned to their conversations, assuming she would simply smile, offer a toast, maybe help with a few arrangements. They had no idea what was about to happen. She let her eyes drift over the room, taking in the details, the custom floral arrangements, the champagne tower, the elegantly wrapped gifts. All of it, the grand engagement, had been paid for unknowingly with their own money, meticulously borrowed, transferred, and subtly redirected through her carefully planned channels. "Hey, Sophie," Ryan said, approaching with a nervous grin. "Thanks for helping out with." She cut him off with a calm smile, letting the silence hang. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down, the unspoken assumption that she had contributed modestly, as always. She let her gaze linger on her mother's eyes, sharp, expectant, slightly smug, before speaking. "You're welcome," she said, her tone smooth but deliberate. "And actually, you've already paid." The words hit them like ice. Ryan blinked. "What do you mean?" Sophie walked to the center of the room, letting the crowd fall quiet. "The engagement party, the flowers, the catering, the venue, all taken care of," she said, her voice measured. "All of it was funded by the money you set aside for me, that you assumed I would squander, that I would ask for help with." Her parents froze. Their lips parted, words caught somewhere between disbelief and shame. Ryan's jaw tightened as he processed the implication. Sophie let a beat pass before continuing. "I wanted to make a statement," she said, letting her words roll with quiet confidence. "I wanted to show that I'm not the person you thought I was. I'm not struggling. I'm not powerless. And I certainly don't need validation from anyone here." Murmurs rippled through the room. Madeline looked stunned, her hand hovering near her mouth. Sophie could see the realization dawn. The elegant, composed woman in front of them was no longer the overlooked little sister, the one dismissed and underestimated. Sophie gestured lightly toward her tablet, casually placed on the table, displaying her design firm's latest projects and client testimonials. "This is my work. This is my company. And yes, I'm financially independent, far beyond what any of you imagined. Every step, every client, every dollar, earned and owned by me." Her parents exchanged glances, shock, guilt, disbelief, while Ryan's face went pale. We didn't know," he stammered. Sophie smiled, a mix of warmth and steel. "Now you do. And I hope this teaches all of you a lesson. Never underestimate what I can do, and never assume what I will or won't achieve." The room fell into a stunned silence. She had claimed her power, and they had no choice but to witness it. The room was thick with tension, the hum of whispers fading as Sophie Walker took her place at the center of attention. For the first time, the balance of power had shifted. She wasn't just the overlooked sister anymore. She was the architect of her own destiny, standing tall while her family grappled with the truth. "I want to be clear," Sophie began, her voice calm but authoritative, carrying the weight of years they had dismissed. "I am willing to help, but not on your terms. Not anymore." Her parents exchanged uneasy glances, her mother adjusting a pearl necklace nervously. Ryan, still pale, nodded slowly, unsure how to respond. Sophie leaned against the table, letting her hands rest lightly on the polished surface. "First," she said, "you will stop treating me like a charity case. I am not here to be controlled or judged. If you want to be part of my life, it will be as equals. Period." Her father's lips pressed into a thin line, but she held his gaze unwavering. "Second," she continued, "you will pursue the things that matter to you, not what society or anyone else tells you is practical." "Mom, Ryan, I want to see you chasing your dreams, not living through fear of judgment or failure." Her mother's eyes glistened, a mixture of guilt and reluctant understanding. "Sophie, I didn't realize," she started, but Sophie held up a hand, smiling softly yet firmly. "Third," Sophie said, "any toxic patterns, favoritism, comparisons, passive-aggressive comments, they stop here. I've built a life worth celebrating. And if you want to be part of it, you must respect boundaries, support one another, and embrace growth." Ryan swallowed hard, nodding again. I understand," he murmured, voice quiet but sincere. Sophie let her gaze soften for a moment. "I'm not cruel. I care about each of you. But care without change is meaningless. If we are to move forward, it will be with honesty, respect, and accountability. I've waited too long to see any of you truly try." There was a beat of silence, and then a collective exhale as the weight of her words settled in. Sophie could feel the shift, the subtle relief in her parents' posture, the tentative pride, flickering in Ryan's eyes. They were beginning to see the woman she had become, the authority she carried, and the uncompromising standards she now set for herself and for them. "And finally," Sophie said, allowing a small, triumphant smile, "I will always be here if you're willing to grow. But make no mistake, I will not be sidelined or underestimated again. I am Sophie Walker, and my life is my own. You have a choice. Join me honestly or watch from the sidelines." The room was silent, heavy with reflection, and Sophie could feel the subtle beginnings of change. For the first time in years, she had not only claimed her success, but used it to redefine the boundaries of her family, to create a space where respect, love, and empowerment could coexist. Weeks passed after the engagement, and the tension in the Walker household began to dissolve. Sophie watched quietly, with a mixture of satisfaction and tenderness, as her family started to embrace the changes she had set in motion. Her mother, once rigid and critical, now called her for advice on personal projects, cautiously at first, then with increasing trust. Ryan had enrolled in a culinary course he had always dreamed of but never pursued, and every time he shared a new recipe or technique, Sophie saw a spark of pride in his eyes. Even her father, stoic and reserved, began asking thoughtful questions about her design firm, no longer dismissive, but genuinely curious. Sophie found herself reflecting on the journey, the moments of pain, the nights spent questioning herself, and the years she had built in secret. Each struggle had shaped her, each rejection had honed her resolve. And now, standing amid this quiet transformation, she realized that the power she wielded wasn't just in her wealth or success. It was in the clarity, courage, and boundaries she had established. One evening, she held her grandmother's silver bracelet in her hand, feeling the smooth surface against her palm. "Guard it. Feed it. Never let anyone snuff it out," the words whispered in her memory. She smiled softly. That little fire had carried her through, and now it burned brightly enough to illuminate a path for those who were willing to walk beside her with honesty and respect. Sophie leaned against the balcony, watching the sunset paint the city's skyline in gold and rose. The engagement party, the confrontation, the years of struggle, they were all pieces of a puzzle that had finally come together. She felt a sense of peace that was deeper than triumph. It was the peace of someone who had honored her own worth, demanded respect, and inspired change without compromising her integrity. Her phone buzzed with a message from Ryan. "Thanks, Sophie. For everything." "Really?" She smiled, fingers brushing the silver bracelet. And in that quiet moment, Sophie Walker whispered to herself, the words carrying the weight of her journey and the promise of the future. "I will never shrink for anyone again." It was simple. It was powerful. And it was hers, a final, cinematic note of strength, independence, and grace.